All right. We all have websites that we like, and we all have websites that we don't like. Um, Websites that we like, we use, all right, and we use often, typically. 1 second while I close the door. Websites that we like, we use, and we use often. So, for example, if I was going to name a site that I like, that I use often, it would be Google, right? Why do I like it? Because it gives me what I want. All right. It gives me, it satisfies one of my goals, you know. Um, the goal that the reason I go to Google typically is to find something, you know, to search for something and to get relevant answers. All right. To easily get relevant answers to uh, some term I want to search or something I want to search or whatever. And it does a really good job at that. It also allows me to search for images if I want to, and news and so on. All right. So let's keep that in the back of our heads. A website is good if it helps you achieve your goals. All right. Now, what about bad websites? Well, I guess the opposite is true with bad websites. Bad websites make it difficult to achieve your goals. Now, what do we do with bad websites? Well, it depends. Some websites that are bad, we simply don't use anymore. You know, other websites that are bad, we have to live with. All right, but it makes our life more difficult. For example, I'm not going to evaluate how good of a site Canvas is. If it's, I generally think it's pretty good, but if it was bad, we're stuck with it, right? At least for the time being. You know, we can't say, well, I'm not going to use Canvas in this class because that's the platform that they use here at LC. So some bad websites we're stuck with. Our life is just made more difficult. Other websites that are bad, we don't use. And if it's a case of like an online retailer, not use equals not buy from. All right. And that causes a loss of revenue and so on. I think there's a misconception when people talk about web design. When people talk about website, web design, usually they think in terms of the colors, the fonts, how it looks, and so forth. Now that is part of web design, but it's not the whole of web design, and it's probably not even the most important part of web design. All right. We're going to practice a methodology for our project, our semester project. And just in case any of you don't realize, you're allowed to start working on your semester project earlier in the semester. You don't have to wait till the last week. Okay, that was a joke. Sorry, it wasn't really funny. But we're going to follow a specific methodology, and that's going to take us through the process of having an idea from a website to the website sort of final form, or at least a prototype of the final form of the website. And we're going to do that by following steps. And I want to define those steps first, and then we are going to look at specifically what the requirements are in this class or what you need to do. So first step is the strategy step. Second step is the scope. Third step is the structure. Should I get these names right? Fourth step is a wireframe. And finally, you have a prototype. And if you do or have done other kinds of software development, this is really similar to the process you go through when designing an application or a computer system. It's real similar. I mean, it's a bit different because websites are a little bit different than other applications, but it's real similar. In our case, the first four of these steps will be done in a Word document. The last step is actual HTML files, CSS files, images, etc. So when you turn in your design, which is due prior to the end of the semester, we're doing the project in 2 steps. First step is the design, which is due November 1st, which sounds to me like a long time from now, but really isn't. It's like a month and a week from now. So 5 weeks from now or so. Notice these 2 things, the number associated with each of these. This is 15 points. This is 20 points. To give you some perspective, a typical weekly assignment is worth 5 points. So this is 35 out of 100 points. All right. And the rest of the material is 65 points. That ought to be a really large hint to you that you want to do well on the project, because it's pretty much very difficult to get, well, you know, it's pretty much very difficult to get a good grade without doing a pretty good job on the project. All right. Most people that work and apply themselves generally do create good projects. And I have no doubt that you guys will do the same thing. I mean, I've looked at your assignments so far, and for the most part, they've been really good. But the people that are having difficulty now, you know, use that as motivation to get the project in and get it correct as possible. So when I say you're going to turn in a design, you're going to turn in a Word document that contains these 4 sections and a prototype of at least 3 pages in HTML, CSS, and so on. So what's the strategy section about? The strategy section is about goals. All right. That's what you are defining in the strategy section. Now, with goals, there's goals coming in 2 directions. There's goals that the maker of the website have. There's goals that visitors to the website have. A website is good if it satisfies both groups of people's goals. So it, you know, the organization or the person that's creating the website has some goals. If they're satisfied and the user's goals are not, it's not going to be successful. The reverse is true. it's not going to be very successful. A website is ultimately most successful when it solves everyone's goals. So for this assignment, the strategy section is going to consist of a description of your site's purpose. In other words, I'm writing a site, I'm writing a guide to Pokemon, for example. I'm writing a guide to Call of Duty. I'm writing a fan page for the Cleveland Browns. Something like that. The second step is to create, or the second piece of this, I guess it can go in any order, is to create 3 user personas. Now, what are personas? Personas are representative they represent different categories of users. Because when we talk about the user's goal, that's sort of incomplete because each user is a unique individual, right? And therefore might not have the same goals as anyone else. Well, that's all fine and good, but we can't develop a website and solve 8 billion people on Earth's goals, right? So we come up with groups of people. So let's think, for example, if we were designing a website for Lorain Community College, if you were part of the design team to redo Lorain Community College's website, some of the personas would include students, current students, right? That's one group of people. Now, not every student has the same goal, but we can sort of generalize a little bit and say, well, typically these are the kinds of things that students are going to be interested in. How to apply for financial aid, what courses are offered at what times, register. What if I have, how do I visit a counselor? What if I have questions about my financial aid or my degree program or whatever? There's a set of things that group of people have that maybe other groups have, maybe they don't have. All right, but there's a set of goals and needs defined for that group of people. Another group of people would be instructors or faculty or employees, let's say. Tucked away on our website are some of our human resources forms that we fill in if we want to do something. You know, if we want to take a sick day or something like that. Now, they may not be public to the entire community, but they are accessible through our website, right? We might want to know the academic calendar, all right? To know, hey, when does spring semester start and when does it end? There may be people that are interested in maybe coming to Lorain Community College. Why should I come to Lorain Community College as opposed to going to some other school? What are the university partnership programs available? And how do I apply? There might be members of the community that aren't students in the traditional sense, but want to take classes for their own personal development. Maybe a phys ed class, or maybe, you know, sort of a fun class. It may not even be a credit class because we offer non-credit classes as well. Or maybe they want to know what events are happening at Stocker Center because we have things going there. Or a local sports fan, when does a basketball team play? All right. Now, for a big website like Lorain Community College, we could probably come up with 10 or so, I would guess, personas. It's probably not a stretch. I mean, I just named 4 or 5 of them off the top of my head. And if we thought about it a little more, we could come up with a few more. For your website, for your project, you were to come up with 3 personas. All right. 3 groups of people that are going to be visiting your site. For example, let's say you were doing the guide to Pokemon. You might have your hardcore collector as one persona, someone who's just starting out as a second persona, and maybe a parent, a parent that wants to see what this is all about. Maybe they see their kid playing it for 20 hours a day and they want to know, gee, what's all this about? So the parents would be a third persona. If we had a restaurant, one persona might be people that know that they're going for the restaurant. I guarantee if my friends tell me, hey, let's go out to dinner at such and such restaurant, first thing I do, probably before I even finish reading their text, is go to their website, look at their menu. All right. I'm already planning what I'm going to have. All right. Another persona might be people that are planning on hosting an event at the restaurant, like maybe a Christmas party for a department at some job. Do they have accommodations for that? Third persona might be people looking for employment, looking for a job being a server or a chef or whatever. Without too much of a stretch, you can come up with 3 personas for almost any topic, I would think. And if you're having trouble thinking of them, let me know your topic and we can work on it to come up with that. You're going to create this for each persona. I did this a few years ago. It's still a pretty good example of a persona. James LeBron. Description: father of a young man who wants to be a good basketball player. Son is in 8th grade. You can tell I did it a few years ago. What, his son's in college now or graduated from college or something like that. I don't know. James wants to help his son improve skills as he goes into high school. James LeBron played some basketball, but not an expert. Goals: help his son learn skills that he doesn't have before. Find some drills to improve the student's skills. Help son learn to shoot with both hands. That's really all you need for each persona. There's examples online of personas that go into more depth. You can look at one of those. Here's an example. They give the person a name and they give a picture, even if it's a picture of one of your friends, a stock photo, whatever. That may seem corny. Why do you do that? Well, you do that because you really want to try to get inside that person's head. You really want to make them feel like they're actual people that actually have goals, as opposed to thinking in vague terms of the user. So this particular persona is for a person who has narrow feet, and they put some other characteristics. And this is some of the problems that they experience. This is some of the goals. This is their motivation. And here's interesting. This is actual feedback of customers that fit into this category of user. But notice also their goals of what they want to do. This is really a very detailed one. For our purposes, something like this: name, picture, description of the persona, and a list of goals is sufficient. You're also going to define the goals as the creator of the site. As a shoe store, your goals obviously are going to relate to selling. But a vague goal like we want to sell shoes isn't really good. Maybe we want to increase sales 10% over last year. Maybe we want to get into a new market. We want to market our high-end fashion shoes that we don't have particularly strong sales in. Or maybe we want to shift our focus to athletic shoes or something like that. So the more specific that you can make these goals, the clearer it is whether you've satisfied them or not. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. Goals should be specific to your website. For example, I get this every semester, but people will define as a goal, I want it to have good navigation. Well, of course you want it to have good navigation, right? I mean, that goes without saying. That's not really your goal. Your goal isn't to build a site with great navigation. Your goal is to build a site that sells shoes or provides information about your college or gives information about a restaurant or something like that. Or the site should be accessible, or the site should be user-friendly. These are all true statements, but they don't count as one of your goals. Another thing, let's hold this thought about what constitutes a good goal when we look at the next section. All right, so you have a description of the site's topics and purpose, 3 personas, your goals, the goals of each persona. It should look professional. The next step is the scope. And in the scope, you define requirements. What do I mean by requirements? I mean content on your site that satisfies goals. Now, goals and requirements may seem similar to you, but there is a difference. The goals are what the party wants to achieve. Requirements are what content is going to be on the site that's going to help achieve those goals. So, for example, one persona for a restaurant may be a person with special dietary needs. They're vegetarian or they're allergic to shellfish or whatever. All right. A menu that shows ingredients or maybe shows a little designation, like, is this dish vegetarian? Is it vegan? Does it contain shellfish or whatever? Would be something that you'd put on your site to help solve the goal. The goal is, I want to know if I can eat at this restaurant. The the requirement that will help meet that goal will be a menu that shows coding for allergens, for vegetarian, vegan, kosher, halal, whatever. If you go back to James LeBron, he wanted a site that would help his son learn how to shoot with both hands. Well, that should be content somewhere on the site. So maybe a discussion of why you need to use both hands, be able to shoot with both hands, or maybe a video that describes drills. All right. Now, every goal that you have should be covered by some requirements, right? So if you define one of your personas as having the goal of, I have a food allergy, are there any dishes I can eat at this restaurant? Or maybe differently put, what are the dishes I can eat at this restaurant? If you don't have any pieces of content that relate to that goal, then you messed up, right? You have a goal, you have one of the main goals of a particular group of customers that you're not addressing at all. And that's bad, right? Because remember, a website is good if it helps us or our users solve their needs or serve their needs, fulfill their goals. The reverse is true. Let's say on the restaurant, I want to have a biography of the chef. Maybe. Is that relevant or not? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. How do you decide? Well, you would look at the goals of the people. For example, if you're a restaurant of that's run by a very famous chef, all right, like Michael Simon had his burger place until a few years back. I used to love eating there. I forget what it was called. But in the case of a celebrity chef, yeah, you want to put the person's biography there because that's a draw for that particular restaurant. If I'm going to eat at Applebee's, though, the biography of the chef probably really doesn't matter that much. It's not going to influence my decision one way or another. Don't write a paragraph for this. Make a bulleted list. If you want, put next to the requirement which goal it solves. Put a little indication, like maybe P1 would mean for persona 1, it serves their first goal. That's a way of sort of double checking and making sure that your goals and requirements match up. Notice as this far, we haven't talked about fonts yet. We haven't talked about colors yet. We haven't talked about what the page is going to look like. All right. We'll get to those because they are important, but they're not necessarily the first things that you consider. Next step is a structure section, which is what pages I'm going to have and how are they connected. When you define the scope, you're just writing individual pieces of content. Now, you're not saying about what pages they're going to appear on. All right. I might have a list of 15 different requirements. 15 would be a good number of requirements. That doesn't mean I'm going to have 15 separate pages, a page for each requirement. All right. I might combine a few of them. And, For my restaurant, maybe one of the requirements is I show a map to the restaurant. Maybe another requirement is I show the hours that they're open. And maybe a third is I want to show the daily specials. You might decide to put all those on one page, all right, because they kind of go together. That would be a possibility. At this point, you decide what pages you have and how they're connected. And you do that by making a diagram that looks like this. Home page. From the home page, you have this page, and this page. Maybe from this page, you have sort of sub pages underneath that. Now you could break this down. You could break down your content any number of ways. Let's say if I had a shoe store that I was doing a website for. This might be our homepage. This might be athletic shoes. This may be for children and for adults. That would be one way to break down the content. Another way might be, this is the homepage. These are men's shoes, and you might have dress, casual, sports, women's shoes, dress, casual, sports, children's shoes, and so on. Pretty much any topic you can decide to break down any number of different ways. Well, that's your job as a designer, to decide what's the best way for it to be divided. What will best serve our goals to have the pages set up. Now, both too many pages and too few pages are a bad idea. If you had everything on one page, it might be difficult to find everything. Now, let me put a footnote to that is I've seen some really clever one-page websites that had really good navigation, and it was easy to find everything on the page. But if we just have one long page where you scroll, it might be difficult to find what you're looking for. If everything was on its own page, it might be very difficult to find what you're looking for because you have to click the link a bunch of times. For this project, ideally, you're going to have, 5 to 7 pages. Now, this is me talking to you as a person as opposed to as a professor. Be kind to yourself. Don't design a gigantic website that you're going to have to build that's going to do way more than the requirements. You can do it. You're allowed to do it. All right. I'm not going to stop you. But keep in mind what the requirements are. So if you want to have, if you're supposed to have 5 to 7 web pages and your design has 30 web pages, you're probably doing too much work. And I've literally had students like that. And not that I don't want to encourage you to do the work, but I just want to let you know that you don't have to do all that work. All right. 5 to 7 will be sufficient. So you'll actually produce a chart like this. I don't care what you do, hand draw it like I did and take a, take a screenshot of it and incorporate that into your Word document. I'm interested in the content more than the appearance. Keep in mind for a second what we are using this design document for. I get that question a lot. Why do I bother going through this design process? Why don't I just build the site? You design it for a couple of reasons. First of all, to get your thoughts together. And if you're just sort of shooting from the hip and doing things as they occur to you, you're liable to forget something important. So this process takes you through a set of steps, and the hope is that you'll catch everything. And you document it so you remember it when you're building it. Oh yeah, I did say I would have a allergens webpage on this restaurant website. I better put it on there. Someone once said faded ink is better than the best memory. So if it's documented, you don't run with the opportunity of, you have less of a chance of forgetting it. The second is communication. In a real world environment, you're not developing a website in a vacuum. You might have other people working on the site with you. All right. You may have one person that is the JavaScript guru, another person that's the HTML guru, a third person that's the CSS and graphic design guru. Well, this design will sort of communicate to all those people what the content of the site is going to be and what it's going to look like. When we get into more extensive websites, there may actually be a database involved. Lastly, we have a client that we want to communicate to. It's better to go through this process and explain to the user why you're creating the site that you are, rather than just going ahead and do it and then have to redo it in the end. All right? Like, have you ever been driving and, you see a road is closed, so it's like, I'm going to take this shortcut. A lot of times when I do that, I find the shortcut ends up taking me more time than if I would have just stuck through the traffic. All right. Taking the shortcut doesn't always guarantee you're going to end quicker. So therefore, go through the design process. Right. The next, so that's what it's going to be, and explain why you divided it that way. Next step that you're going to have is a wireframe. And let's look up wireframes. This one I like. This would be a wireframe for maybe like a news site. Headline, top story of the day, other top stories, some other stuff. And that's a wireframe, where you're sort of sketching out in general what the general layout of the page is going to be. Now, there's some pretty common wireframes, especially for smallish sites like this. One of them is to have a header on the top, a navigation underneath it, and the content of the page underneath that. One of them is to have a banner at the top, the navigation on the side, and the content like that. I forgot a footer. You're designing sort of the shell of the web page. What belongs where? Now, do you need to have a different wireframe for each page on your site? No. In fact, you can have one wireframe for every page on your site. Or you may have a couple of wireframes. Maybe your home page has a different layout than the rest of your pages. Or maybe your gallery page has a different layout than the rest of your pages. So with 5 to 7 pages on your site, you probably will have 1 or 2 wireframes. Maybe you'll have a third. If you want to do more than 2, I would suggest you ask me. Again, why do too much extra work? Because these are just sketches of the basic layout of the page. Finally, we come to the prototype. And the prototype is where we actually code things. We actually create the HTML and the CSS and images. Here is where we decide what the site is going to look like in terms of color, font, and so on. Now, we learned last time how to make every single thing on our page a different color, all right? But we could probably see that that's not a good idea. You use color for reasons on websites, not just decoration. You use colors to make things stand out, right? If you had a web page where everything was white background, black font, and you had one yellow square with black font, that would stand out, that would jump out at the viewer. All right? So use color to emphasize things. Use color to separate things. So if I have a website like this, maybe I'll make this one color, this another color, this a third color, and maybe I'll match this with this, the header and the footer. So you might use 4 or 5 fonts, or not fonts, colors. And the same thing is true with fonts, all right? You're not going to have every section a different font. Again, it would look like a ransom note then, all right? You might pick, though, a couple of fonts, one for the headlines, one for the headings, and one for the text. And again, we mentioned that sans serif is used usually for the text, like the paragraphs, and serif fonts are used for the headings. But yeah, we're not gonna vary it too much. So the key is to give variety without going too much. Excessive colors and excessive fonts just confuse the issue. Whereas appropriate colors and appropriate fonts make the layout of the page more clear. Now, what colors do you choose? Well, depends on the kind of site you're doing. You know, the classic example I give, I probably even gave it in this class, is if you're doing a site about Barbie, you're going to use pink probably and white, pastel colors maybe. If you're doing for a heavy metal band, it's probably going to be have a lot of black in it, right? If you're doing one for a particular organization, you might use their colors, right? Coca-Cola has a red logo, right? So maybe your site would have red on it. Learning Community College, our school colors, I believe, are blue and something. So we would use blue on our website. Ohio State, scarlet and gray, right? So your colors would sort of match the branding of your organization and help create a mood. Sort of the same thing with a font. Could you imagine a serious news site that used Comic Sans as their font? Sort of loses credibility, right? Likewise, if you had a serious news site that used, you know, wild neon colors, it would somehow not be as credible. When in doubt, black text on a white background is a good choice. If you can't think of anything better, do that. All right, at least for the main content area of your page. Because keep in mind, you might have 3, 4, 5 colors on your site, but you sort of get white, black, and gray for free, right? You sort of get those for free. So if my theme was, you know, for Barbie, different shades of pink, you know, you're also allowed to have white and black on the site as well. Those are neutral colors and they go with everything. You're asked to do 3 pages of prototype 4. Now, a prototype means that it implies that it's not complete. All right. In other words, when you're putting a prototype together, think of it as like a rough draft for a term paper. All your words don't have to be completely correct. Sometimes people use Greek text. What is Greek text? I'll generate 5 paragraphs of it. Notice that is sort of looks more like Latin. Does it mean something? I don't know. Maybe it means something in Latin. Maybe it doesn't. Got me. But you can copy and use that just to fill the space, to show people, hey, I don't have all the news articles, or I don't have all the articles written, but this is what the page is going to look like, rather than having just an empty page. Same thing with images. You might use placeholder images, right? In a real project, you may have a photographer going out and taking pictures of the company's products. Well, you might just take some sample pictures just to have something to fill the space, to show that, well, this isn't the exact picture we're going to use, but yeah, there's going to be a picture here. Remember, the prototype especially is meant to be shown to people so that they can look at it, make feedback. The interesting thing is that sometimes it's very difficult for people to describe what they want, but it's pretty easy for people to look at something and say what they like and what they don't like about it, right? If someone says, hey, I can make a suit for you, what do you want it to look like? Well, it's a blank slate. I don't know. I've never thought about having a custom-made suit made for me before. I'm not sure what colors I would look like. Well, I would prefer, and so on. But if someone had 3 suits that were cut different ways, made out of different fabric, and so on, I might be able to say, well, you know what? I like the color of that suit, and I like the cut of this suit, and I like the fabric of this suit. And again, you have your answers. Sometimes you create prototypes specifically to be criticized. I don't mean you don't do a good job intentionally on them. I mean, you don't worry about if they are critical about them, because the purpose of the prototype is not to be perfect. It's okay to be incomplete with a prototype. All right. But it should show the key things. It should show the navigation. It should show the basic layout. It should show font scheme, color scheme. With the thought that if it isn't good, then the feedback that you get will allow you to create a layout that is going to match the needs of the organization. By all means, send me what you have and I can evaluate it before you turn it in. Some of the stuff may seem vague until you get into it and working on it. So send me what you have done so far, and I'll be happy to evaluate it and try to set it straight. All right, are there any questions?
What might be the most creative project you see?
The most creative project, that's a good question. That's tough to evaluate, keeping in mind that 2 projects can look really different, but both of them be excellent because they each match what they're doing. I have to plead the fifth on that one. I can't think of anything. I mean, I've seen people have implemented some basic JavaScript on their page, and that really adds some things because we do cover JavaScript in this class, but we don't really go in depth. So people that incorporate JavaScript on the page is good. But But again, by no means are you required to do that. Yeah, if I can think of something, I'll let you know, but nothing springs to mind off the top of my head. Right, that's all I had for today. We will see you in lab. If not, we will see you next week.